Hey guys, this is Holt recording for Murphy's Vault TCGs. And today we're going to be doing a modern competitive event with one of my favorite decks in modern. It was my birthday last week, so I treated myself and I bought into Constructed Online. So today we're going to be playing a deck called Eldrazi and Taxes. Now, if you like the content, you enjoy watching the games and seeing what we're doing, drafts, box openings, all that kind of good stuff, like, subscribe, comment, tell us what you want to hear, let us know, and we'll keep on delivering good content. Alright, let's fire in. We're going to start with just a really quick deck tech, in case some folks aren't familiar with the deck. Eldrazi in Texas is a spin on the modern Death in Taxes variant. Originally the shell was just white. It basically consisted of using the mana efficiency of Aether Vial, combined with little creatures that sort of disrupted your opponent's strategy. So we have things like Leonin Arbiter, which is very good in a format where everyone's cracking fetches. Basically, it's trying to do an impression of some of the land taxing that we get more in Legacy, like Wasteland and whatnot. Then we have Thalia, which makes non-creature spells cost one more. Just basically makes your opponent play off curve. And then we have the utility of Flicker Wisp, which can do a ton of broken stuff, whether it's taking a mana off your opponent's turn by flickering a land, getting new ETB effects, and in this Eldrazi shell as tons more synergies. So we, of course, also have for our removal Path to Exile, and it works extremely well with Leonin Arbiter. So what the Eldrazi package adds to it is we have to splash 2 more colors. So this shell, well, we splash black and we splash colorless, I should say, but they act like 2 more colors. And we get a bunch of really powerful above curve cards. So by splashing black, we get Tidehollow Sculler, which lets us disrupt our opponent's whatever they're playing, sort of taking their next move out of their hand while still making a board presence. We get Eldrazi Displacer, which does basically completely broken things with any ETB effects. And there's a ton, even something as simple as Flicker Wisp, being able to repeatedly flicker it so that you can exile something until the next end step on command is just extremely powerful and extremely disruptive. We get Wasteland Strangler, which acts as another piece of removal, but also gives us something to do with the things that we exile. So a really, really powerful way to gain card advantage in this deck is to flicker something with Flicker Wisp. It's gone to the end of turn, and then we vial in Wasteland Strangler. We can process what's in exile, whether it be a land, creature, anything, and then turn it into a sort of a pseudo bolt effect. And then we get our top end, which is Thought-Knot Seer, which, again, just like Tidehollow Sculler, lets us disrupt our opponent's plan while making a much bigger board presence. 4/4 is pretty relevant in a format that centers around bolt. If all these sort of disruptive elements are the 1/2 jabs, Thought-Knot Seer, something like Brimaz, are the sort of finishers, the uppercut that ends the game, as it were, or attempts to. We also have some other one-ofs. We have the Thalia Heretic Cathar, which is just another thing to, again, tax land bases. Fetches come into play tapped, which is a huge tempo swing, and it makes sure that if they're playing big creatures late in the game that we're still getting in for damage. As far as the land base is concerned, since we're using Leonin Arbiter, which obviously taxes heavily and punishes the use of fetch lands, we are using other lands. So we're using Caves of Koilos in this deck. It's more like a tri-land than it is a dual land. We have the fast lands from Kaladesh for black and white. Eldrazi Temple is probably the strongest land in our deck. It lets us play completely above curve. One of the strongest starts you can have with this deck is turn 1, Eldrazi Temple, Aether Vial, into turn 2, Eldrazi Temple, Thought-Knot Seer. It's very hard for a lot of decks to come back from that. We have Ghost Quarters, and that's mostly because with Leonin Arbiter, yeah, if they're tapped out, that becomes a strip mine. Then we have just some shock lands and a couple basics. We also have one Iganjo Castle, and basically that just synergizes with all the legends we have in the deck. We have 7 legends main deck, and then we have a couple more in the sideboard, which I'm going to go over in a second. But basically what this does is it lets us save. It basically makes combat really difficult if they're trying to sort of double block Thalia, or if they've got a couple bolts or something like that, or they want to like be cheeky in combat and put a lot of blocks on Brimaz. We can prevent the damage, and it also just saves Thalia Heretic Cathar from a bolt. And I mean, it doesn't enter tapped or anything. It's basically kind of like running another basic planes. We just don't get it off our own if we get Path to Exile or something like that. As far as sideboard is concerned, I've kind of organized the things in terms of spiciest to most typical, I guess you could say. For the 1-drops, we have these Burnton Forge Tenders. They're a great card. They come in against Burn, anything that's going to be running Anger of the Gods to make sure we don't get sweeped. Even comes in against things like Ad Nauseam, because, yeah, I'm going to prevent all the damage from Lightning Storm. Blessed Alliance, it's good against Infect, it's good against Burn as well. Just the life gain is really relevant, and the modal nature of the spell makes it pretty strong. I was previously running Sun Lances in this slot to deal with decks that have like Birds of Paradise and things like that. And it could be possible in this new format, now that we have Fatal Push, and maybe 1 or 2 of these just come out and become Fatal Pushes. It really depends how the meta shakes out. Rest in Peace, it's a good catch-all. Dredge obviously got a lot weaker with the Grave Troll bannings, but graveyard strategies are abundant. It's also just really good against Snap and Goyf decks. I used to run this before Dredge rotated out, in the main deck, because it was just so applicable if you played any of the mid-range matchups. Even something like one of the hardest cards for this deck to deal with is really big go-wide strategies. And if you can make them pay 4 mana by having Thalia on the battlefield for 2 tokens and then go, okay, I'm just going to exile your graveyard, it helps a lot. We have Stony Silence, that's obviously for affinity, also things like Ad Nauseam and other things that want to use artifacts, great against Tron. Zealous Persecution, this is probably one of the cards that is always in the sideboard of this deck, and a lot of people who aren't experienced with it kind of look at it and go, why would you want that effect? Like, what does that do? It's not really a Wrath, it's not really... like, I guess it's a weird anthem, but actually it's really important to make sure that we can deal with go-wide token strategies. When your opponent is sideboarding into Timely Reinforcements, Lingering Souls, or they're just combat matchups, some of the Zoo decks, you can just play this and completely blow them out and totally win combat. Even against something like Bant Eldrazi when they're playing Sky Spawners and things like that, it can just clear their board and make your attack lethal. Spellskite is a pretty good card. Obviously good against Infect, any of the control matches. Pretty straightforward, I think, that one. And now we move on to some of my spice. Now, mind you, in the main deck, I have some spice using things like Brimaz, using the Igandro Castle. Those are sort of non-standard. The deck has a main shell, which is the sort of Eldrazi Displacer, Wasteland Strangler, Tidal Scholar, Thalia, Leonin Arbiter, Thought-Knot Seer. But then it does have a couple flex spots in there. Obviously, Path to Exile and Aether Vial, you don't really cut either, though in the new format, they may become some variety of Fatal Push. It's yet to be seen. And this is the sort of spice for my sideboard. So, sort of Light and Shadow, the swords aren't good for Modern, in general. But the one thing about this deck is that a lot of its matchups are really 50-50, and that especially becomes prevalent when you're playing things like Jund and Abzan. Abzan is a bit of a worse matchup just because they have access to Lingering Souls. But basically, this card lets us grind a little bit. You'll find in these big mid-range matchups, you'll all end up out of cards unless you win very quickly by restricting their mana base. And then you're just kind of top decking worse than them. Classic Jund strategy, right? So what Sword Light and Shadow does is let us refuel our hand as long as we draw a creature, and basically just get protection from some removal spells. Your Terminates, your Abrupt Decays, your now Fatal Push makes this more relevant, Path to Exile, all that kind of good stuff. And while it seems a bit odd, I've been having some success with it, so I figured I'd try it out today. Camball. This is a card that I've not seen a lot of Eldrazi and Taxes players run, and I'm really surprised about that. And the new format might not be as good now that Git Probe is getting banned, but it's an excellent card against Burn. It's really good against pretty much any of the unfair combo decks that want to just cast a bunch of cantrips and spells. Against Storm, if you play this card, it resolves, and you can protect it. Say they don't have the Bolt that turn. Tendrils is a lot faster than Grape Shot. So I think it's a really good card. It also synergizes well with Agando Castle and other things like that. Now, normally in this law, I'd probably run Gideon Ally of Zendikar, but I found out it was 20 ticks online. So I was like, okay, maybe I'll work up to that. So right now I'm running a Mirran Crusader. Obviously, it's really good in that Abzan match I was talking about, or even against Jund. And I think in a format where Fatal Push is going to become some degree of a big player in the format, having something that is pro-black is pretty relevant. Not to mention, you get the chance to live the dream by hooking it up with Sword of Light and Shadow. All right, well, here's the deck, guys. We're gonna start this competitive league. I hope you enjoy the matches. I'll see you in round 1.